Imagine you are floating in the middle of the ocean. The water is dark beneath you, stretching down thousands of feet into a blackness that no human eye has ever seen. The surface glimmers above, far away. You are completely alone. And then something moves below you. Not a shadow, not a current, something enormous, something deliberate, something alive. That feeling, that primal bone-deep terror of something ancient lurking beneath you, is exactly what the Megalodon inspires. And for millions of years, it was not just a feeling, it was reality. The ocean has always held its secrets close. Even today, in 2026, with satellites mapping every inch of land and deep-sea submersibles exploring the trenches, scientists estimate we have only explored somewhere between 5 and 20% of the ocean floor. That number alone is enough to make the imagination run wild. And for decades, it has fueled one of the most persistent myths in popular culture, that the Megalodon, the largest predatory shark that ever lived, might somehow still be out there, hiding, waiting, growing bigger in the darkness. The truth, however, is both more disappointing and far more extraordinary than any myth. Because the real science of Megalodon, the actual peer-reviewed, fossil-backed science, is more jaw-dropping than any Hollywood blockbuster ever dared to imagine. So let us start from the beginning. Let us go back about 23 million years, to a time when the world looked almost nothing like it does today. The continents were still drifting into their familiar shapes. The oceans were warmer, shallower in many places, teeming with life in ways we can barely comprehend. Enormous baleen whales cruised through warm tropical seas. Giant sea turtles the size of cars slid through the currents. Dolphins, early versions of them at least, leapt through waves under a sun that burned just as hot as it does today. And through all of it, like a king moving through his court, came Autodus Megalodon. The name comes from ancient Greek, meaning giant tooth. It is an almost embarrassingly accurate description. Megalodon was not just a large shark. It was the apex predator of an entire geological epoch. For nearly 20 million years, it reigned supreme over every ocean on Earth. Think about that for a moment. 20 million years. Humanity has existed in our current form for somewhere around 300 years. The entire recorded history of human civilization stretches back only about 5,000 years. Megalodon ruled the seas for 20 million. It watched continents shift. It survived climate changes that wiped out entire ecosystems. It was not just an animal, it was a dynasty. And then, roughly 3.6 million years ago, it vanished. The teeth are how we know it existed at all. Megalodon, like all sharks, had a skeleton made almost entirely of cartilage rather than bone. Cartilage does not fossilize well. It breaks down, dissolves, disappears into the sediment without leaving a trace. But teeth are different. Teeth are made of some of the hardest biological material on Earth, dense mineralized structures that can survive millions of years buried in the seafloor. And Megalodon's teeth were extraordinary. Each one could grow up to 18 centimeters long, roughly the length of a human hand from wrist to fingertip. They were triangular, serrated along both edges, perfectly designed for slicing through thick blubber and snapping through bone. Like all sharks, Megalodon shed its teeth continuously, throughout its life, cycling through row after row in an endless conveyor belt of replacement. One single Megalodon could have shed tens of thousands of teeth over its lifetime. Those teeth are still washing up on beaches today, from Maryland to Morocco, from New Zealand to North Carolina. Fossil hunters find them buried in riverbeds, embedded in ancient whale bones, scattered across the ocean floor. For a long time, those teeth were all we had. Scientists used them to estimate size, comparing tooth dimensions to the known proportions of living sharks, particularly the great white, which shares a similar triangular serrated tooth shape. Those calculations suggested Megalodon reached somewhere between 15 and 20 meters in length, bigger than a school bus, heavier than several African elephants, an animal of almost incomprehensible scale. And for decades, those numbers became the accepted truth. But in March of 2025, a team of scientists from around the world gathered everything they knew about Megalodon and completely rewrote the story. The study was led by Professor Kenshu Shimada, a paleobiology professor at DePaul University in Chicago, and it involved 29 researchers from 9 countries across 4 continents. They published their findings in Paleontologia Electronica, one of the most respected journals in vertebrate paleontology. And what they found changed everything. The key was a fossil that had been sitting in a museum collection for over a century. A vertebral column, discovered in Belgium, consisting of 141 individual vertebrae and measuring approximately 11 meters in length. Just the spine. No skull, no tail, no fins, just the backbone of an animal that had died millions of years ago and somehow left behind this extraordinary record of its existence. When the researchers began analyzing this specimen, they quickly ran into a problem. A fascinating problem. Previous estimates of Megalodon's size had been calculated by assuming the animal had the same body proportions as a great white shark. Take a great white, Scale it up to match the tooth size, and you get your Megalodon. It was a reasonable assumption, or so everyone thought, but the Belgian vertebral column did not agree with those numbers. When the team calculated the minimum possible length of the complete shark using the actual physical measurements of each vertebra, they got a figure that was simply impossible to reconcile with earlier estimates. The spine alone was longer than the shark was supposed to be. Something was fundamentally wrong with the old model. So the team went back to basics. They surveyed the body proportions of more than 145 modern shark species and 20 extinct ones, measuring precisely how the head, trunk, and tail related to total body length across the enormous diversity of shark forms. What they found was that previous reconstructions had made a critical error. Megalodon was not shaped like a great white shark at all. The great white shark is a relatively compact, powerful, stocky animal. Its body is built for explosive bursts of speed, for ambush hunting, for striking hard and fast at prey near the surface. But at Megalodon's scale, that body plan becomes physically untenable. A stocky body shape, like that of a great white. Or a bluefin tuna becomes energetically extremely expensive above 7 meters in length. The physics simply do not work. To be efficient at the scale Megalodon operated at, it needed a fundamentally different shape, and the evidence from those vertebrae pointed clearly to what that shape was. Megalodon was slender, elongated, streamlined in a way nobody had anticipated. The researchers compared it not to the great white, but to the lemon shark, a species with a notably more graceful, less bulky body profile. When they recalculated size estimates using this revised body shape, and when they applied their new proportional data from all those modern and extinct shark species, the numbers shifted dramatically upward. The Belgian specimen, just the spine, represented a shark that was over 16 meters long. And when they extrapolated to larger individuals, using vertebrae from a specimen found in Denmark, the numbers became almost surreal. The largest individuals of the species, the biggest megalodons that science can currently evidence, may have reached 24.3 meters in length, 80 feet. That is not 2 school buses end to end. That is closer to 3. And at that length, weighing in at an estimated 94 tons, Megalodon was not just the largest shark ever. It was one of the largest animals ever to have lived on this planet. Let that number breathe for a moment. 94 tons. A blue whale, the largest animal alive today and widely considered the largest animal that has ever existed, weighs somewhere between 100 and 200 tons at its maximum. Megalodon, at its upper end, was approaching the weight of a blue whale. And unlike a blue whale, which is a gentle filter feeder straining tiny krill from the water, Megalodon was a predator, an active, aggressive, supremely adapted killing machine that hunted whales for breakfast. We know what it ate because the fossils tell us directly. Researchers have found Megalodon teeth embedded in the bones of ancient baleen whales, the large, slow-moving filter feeders that dominated Miocene oceans, just as their descendants do today. The bite marks match. The force calculations match. Scientists estimate Megalodon's bite force at somewhere between 40,000 and 100,000 newtons, making it the most powerful bite of any creature that has ever lived. By comparison, a great white shark bites with roughly 18,000 newtons. A saltwater crocodile, famous for its crushing grip, manages somewhere around 16,000. Megalodon bit with a force that would make those numbers look like a gentle nip. It could crush the skull of a sperm whale. It could sever a flipper with a single pass. It was the unchallenged master of everything the ocean contained. Researchers have also found something extraordinary and unsettling in the fossil record. Megalodon teeth embedded in other megalodon teeth. The giant shark did not just eat whales, it ate each other. Whether this represents predation of younger, smaller individuals by the enormous adults, or scavenging on already dead animals, is still debated. But the evidence of cannibalism within the species tells us something important about the competitive brutality of the world Megalodon inhabited. This was not a gentle giant. This was an apex predator in the most absolute sense of the term, an animal that had no natural enemies, no rivals of comparable scale, nothing in its world that could threaten it. So how does an animal like that disappear? The extinction of Megalodon is one of the most studied questions in paleontology, and the answer is not simple. It was not one thing. It was a convergence of pressures that accumulated over millions of years and eventually overwhelmed even an animal this formidable. The first factor was climate. Around 3.6 million years ago, Earth entered a phase of significant global cooling. The planet's climate shifted, ocean temperatures dropped, and the warm, shallow coastal waters that Megalodon depended on began to shrink. Megalodon was not adapted for cold water. Its prey, the mid-sized baleen, whales it hunted most frequently, began migrating to polar regions to follow the cold water upwellings that support the tiny organisms at the base of the food chain. Megalodon could not follow them. Its physiology required warm temperatures to function. As the warm seas contracted, so did Megalodon's habitat. The second factor was competition. This is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating. As Megalodon's world was shrinking, a new predator was rising. The great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, was evolving into the form we recognize today. Smaller, faster, more adaptable to a wider range of temperatures, the great white could survive in waters where Megalodon could not. It could hunt in cooler seas, accessing prey populations that Megalodon was increasingly cut off from. There is evidence that great white sharks and Megalodon overlapped in time for a significant period, and that competition between them, particularly for the same whale and large fish populations, placed enormous additional pressure on the already stressed Megalodon. The third factor was the prey collapse itself. As ocean temperatures changed and whale populations adapted to new environments, the specific types of large, slow-moving baleen whales that Megalodon relied upon most heavily either went extinct themselves or fundamentally changed their behavior and range. An animal the size of Megalodon needed an almost unimaginable quantity of food to survive. Estimates suggest a fully grown adult Megalodon may have needed to consume hundreds of kilograms of food per day just to maintain its body mass. When the food supply falters for a predator of that scale, the consequences are catastrophic and swift. The fourth factor, sometimes overlooked, is geography. Around the same period, the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, the land bridge connecting North and South America, fundamentally altered ocean circulation patterns. Currents that had flowed freely between the Atlantic and Pacific were blocked. Water temperature gradients shifted. Marine ecosystems that had evolved in connection with each other were suddenly separated. The fragmentation of previously interconnected whale populations and migration routes disrupted food chains that Megalodon depended on across multiple ocean basins simultaneously. None of these factors alone would necessarily have been fatal. But together, arriving within a relatively compressed geological time frame, they created a perfect storm. Megalodon's core habitat shrank. Its primary prey became harder to find. A new competitor was taking what was left, and the giant shark, for all its power, for all its millions of years of dominance, had no answer to a world that was changing faster than it could adapt. The very last Megalodon died somewhere around 3.6 million years ago, give or take. We know this because that is the age of the youngest Megalodon teeth ever found. Not estimated, not inferred, not extrapolated. Found. Physical fossils, dated by multiple methods from multiple locations around the world. Nobody has ever found a Megalodon tooth younger than this, not as a fossil, not as a subfossil, not as a freshly shed tooth lying on the seafloor. The fossil record is remarkably consistent on this point across every ocean on Earth. And this brings us to the question that has captured imaginations for decades and fueled films, documentaries, internet forums, and late-night arguments between people who should know better. Is Megalodon still alive? The answer is no, and it is not a hedged, uncertain, maybe we just haven't looked hard enough no. It is a confident, evidence-based, scientifically settled no. The idea that Megalodon might be lurking in the deep ocean, hiding from detection in the unexplored trenches, is seductive but physically impossible for several reasons. The first and most decisive is the absence of teeth. Megalodon shed its teeth constantly throughout its life. Millions of teeth across millions of years now litter the fossil record on every continent. If Megalodon were still alive, even a small surviving population, those teeth would be showing up on ocean floors, on beaches, in deep-sea sediment cores. Modern oceanographic surveys routinely collect sediment from the ocean floor at depths of thousands of meters. No Megalodon tooth younger than 3.6 million years old has ever been found in any of them. Ever. In any ocean. Anywhere on Earth. The second reason is its physiology. Megalodon was not a deep ocean animal. It was adapted for warm, shallow, coastal, and pelagic waters where large whale populations concentrate. The deep ocean, the pitch-black world below 1,000 meters, is cold, nutrient-poor, and simply does not contain enough large prey to sustain an animal of Megalodon's caloric requirements. The Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth, drops to nearly 11,000 meters and is home to small crustaceans and microbes, not the enormous whale populations that Megalodon needed to survive. The third reason is that a living Megalodon would be impossible to miss. We are not talking about an undiscovered species of deep-sea fish or an unknown type of bioluminescent jellyfish. We are talking about an animal that, at full size, would be 80 feet long and weigh nearly 100 tons. It would need to come to shallower waters to hunt. It would leave enormous bite marks on whales and large marine mammals. We would find its shed teeth on beaches. We would capture it on sonar, on underwater cameras, in fishing nets. The idea that an animal this size, this numerous enough to maintain a viable breeding population, could have existed undetected for 3.6 million years while human civilization rose, while we covered the oceans with ships, submersibles, sonar arrays, and deep-sea research stations, is not a gap in our knowledge. It is a fantasy. There was a discovery circulated in early 2026 claiming fishermen in Japan had caught a living juvenile Megalodon in their nets. It spread rapidly across social media and generated enormous excitement. It was entirely fabricated. No credible scientific institution confirmed it. No specimen was examined. No data was published. It was misinformation dressed up in the language of science to exploit exactly the kind of wonder and wishful thinking that Megalodon has always inspired. The Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian, every major paleontological institution in the world has been clear and consistent. Megalodon is extinct. Full stop. But here's the thing that the hoaxers and the conspiracy theorists miss entirely, and it is something worth sitting with. The real Megalodon, the actual animal that swam these oceans for 20 million years, is more astonishing than any fiction. The truth is better than the myth. A living Megalodon, stumbling around in shallow water and getting caught in fishing nets, would be a tragedy, a confused remnant creature out of its time and context. The real Megalodon was the absolute ruler of a world that no longer exists. It was an apex predator of a scale the modern ocean cannot support. It was perfectly, magnificently adapted to its environment, and it reigned for so long that the concept of geological time barely does justice to its dominance. 20 million years. The dinosaurs only lasted about 180 million years, and we consider their reign one of the most successful in the history of life. Megalodon's dynasty lasted more than 10% as long. That is not a failed experiment. That is one of the most successful large predator lineages the planet has ever produced. The 2025 study that revised Megalodon's size and shape is not just a correction to old data. It is a reminder that science is alive, that our understanding of the past changes as new methods emerge, as new fossils are discovered, as new researchers bring new questions to old evidence. The Belgian vertebral column sat in a museum for over a century before someone looked at it with fresh eyes and realized it contained a revolution in our understanding of the largest predatory shark that ever lived. What else is sitting in museum drawers right now, waiting for the right question? There is something else the 2025 study revealed that deserves attention. By modeling Megalodon's cruising speed based on its revised size and body shape, the researchers were able to estimate how fast it likely moved through the water. And the number is both impressive and illuminating. At its enormous size, Megalodon likely cruised at roughly 5 kilometers per hour, a pace that is simultaneously slower than you might expect, and given the animal's sheer mass, absolutely relentless. It did not need to be fast in the way a great white is fast, explosive and ambush-oriented. Megalodon's strategy was likely different. Patient, powerful, covering enormous distances in search of the whale populations it depended on, migration patterns across ocean basins, seasonal hunting cycles following the movements of prey, and intelligence in the basic sense of an animal solving the complex problem of survival at an extraordinary scale that we can only dimly imagine. The researchers also examined what Megalodon's disappearance meant for the ecosystems it left behind. This is a field of study called trophic cascade analysis, and it tells us that the removal of a top predator from an ecosystem does not just create a vacancy. It fundamentally reshapes everything below it. When Megalodon disappeared, the selective pressure it had placed on whale evolution for millions of years vanished overnight. Whales that had evolved to be faster, more agile, more echolocating, partly in response to predation pressure from Megalodon, suddenly found themselves in a world without their ultimate predator. The great whale species we see today, the blue whale, the humpback, the sperm whale, are in some sense shaped by Megalodon's absence as much as by anything else in their evolutionary history. The giant that killed them also, paradoxically, helped make them what they are. And the great white shark, the animal that in popular culture has been overshadowed by its prehistoric predecessor, also owes something to Megalodon. The great white moved into the ecological space that Megalodon's extinction opened up. It became the new apex predator of the large marine mammal niche. It is, in a sense, Megalodon's heir, though a fraction of its size and nowhere near its power. When you see a great white breach the surface and take a seal in an explosion of white water, you are seeing an echo of something much older and much larger, a ghost of a dynasty that once shook the oceans. So where does that leave us? With an animal that was real, that was more magnificent and more enormous than we ever fully appreciated, that ruled the Earth's oceans for 20 million years, and that left its mark on every ecosystem it ever touched, including the ones that exist today. Megalodon is gone, 3.6 million years gone. But in the teeth that wash up on beaches, in the fossils that revolutionize our understanding decade after decade, in the evolutionary fingerprints it left on the animals that survived it, something of it endures. The ocean is not the same ocean it was then. The world is not the same world. But the scale of what Megalodon was, what it represented, what it achieved simply by existing and thriving for so impossibly long, that does not shrink with time. If anything, the more science learns about it, the larger it becomes. And perhaps that is the most honest thing we can say about the greatest predator that ever lived. We do not need it to still be out there, lurking in some undiscovered trench, to feel the weight of its existence pressing down on us from across millions of years. The fossil teeth are enough. The vertebral column in Belgium is enough. The mathematics of its jaws and the physics of its motion through ancient seas are enough. The Megalodon was here. It was real. And it was bigger and stranger and more extraordinary than you have ever been told. Consider what it means to truly reckon with an animal like this. We have a habit, as humans, of scaling everything down to our own experience. We understand big in terms of things we have stood next to, buildings we have entered, vehicles we have ridden. A blue whale is big because we have seen footage of divers beside one, dwarfed and humbled, the whale curving away into the blue distance like a living hillside. A great white is big because we know the Jaws story, we have seen the photographs, we carry the cultural memory of that silhouette rising from the water. But Megalodon exists at a scale that resists even our best analogies. At 24 meters, an adult Megalodon was longer than many of the yachts currently sailing in the world's oceans. Its mouth alone, fully open, could have swallowed a small car whole. The pressure, wave it generated simply by moving through the water, would have been detectable by every fish, every whale, every creature within hundreds of meters. It would not have needed to rush at its prey with the explosive ambush energy of a great white. It could have simply closed the distance with slow, massive sweeps of its enormous tail, a moving wall of animal, and the prey would have had nowhere to go. The study of Megalodon also gives us something far more valuable than just a bigger number to put on a diagram. It gives us a window into the science of gigantism itself. Why do some animals grow so large? What biological and environmental conditions allow a lineage to push through the physical limits that constrain most species? The 2025 study addressed this directly, examining not just Megalodon, but the broader pattern of gigantism in marine vertebrates. And what it found confirms what ecologists have long suspected. Large body size in the ocean is not simply about being powerful, it is about efficiency. It is about the relationship between surface area and volume, about metabolic demands and caloric intake, about the physics of moving large masses through a medium as dense as seawater. For an animal to grow truly enormous in the ocean, it needs a body plan that minimizes drag while maximizing the efficient transfer of energy from its muscles to its movement. This is why the largest animals alive today, the blue whale, the whale shark, the basking shark, are all elongated and streamlined. And it is precisely why the revised Megalodon, the slender lemon shark-shaped Megalodon of the new science, makes so much more physical sense than the bloated, great white-shaped version we had accepted for so long. There's also the question of intelligence. We are careful with this word when we apply it to sharks, and rightly so. Sharks do not have the social complexity of dolphins, the tool use of octopuses, the problem-solving creativity we associate with the most cognitively advanced marine animals. But intelligence, broadly understood as the capacity to process information and make adaptive decisions, exists in sharks in meaningful ways. Great whites show individual personalities, learned behavior, even what some researchers cautiously describe as play. Megalodon, as a lamniform shark, shared basic neurological architecture with the great white. At its scale, navigating the complex problem of finding, tracking, and capturing enormous whales across thousands of kilometers of open ocean required a level of sensory processing and behavioral flexibility that we have probably underestimated. The animal that could efficiently hunt the largest mammals on Earth for 20 million years was not simply a mouth attached to a body. It was a sophisticated predator, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure into something that understood its world in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. There's one final thought worth leaving you with. Every year, fossil hunters on beaches from South Carolina to the coast of Morocco find Megalodon teeth washing out of the sediment and onto the sand. Some of these teeth are the size of a fist. Some are smaller, from younger animals or smaller individuals. All of them carry the same serrated perfection, the same triangular geometry that has not changed significantly across 16 million years of evolution. When you hold a Megalodon tooth in your hand, you are holding something that was formed inside the jaw of a living animal tens of millions of years ago. Something that drew blood. Something that tore through the flesh of a whale in a warm Miocene sea while your entire lineage was still small, furry, and hiding in trees. The weight of that history is almost too large to hold, but hold it anyway. Because that is what science does. It gives us access to things that are too large, too old, too strange for direct experience. And in the case of Megalodon, what it gives us is nothing less than the full, terrifying, magnificent truth of what it means to say that something was the greatest predator that ever lived.